It is now 6 o'clock, and I call this special session of Commerce City Council to order. I would ask council members to turn their mics on, and when speaking, be very close to your mic. We are sharing this online tonight. I want everyone to hear. Item 2 is a resolution authorizing an agreement between the Texas Department of Transportation and the City of Commerce for the street closure of Business 224 Main Street and Washington Street on the fourth weekend of September in 2021 through September 2025 for the annual Boat Arc Bash hosted by the Commerce Chamber of Commerce.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. You have before you an agreement between the City of Commerce and the Texas Department of Transportation regarding street closures related to the Boat Arc Bash. Historically, this is something we've done in 5-year increments so that we don't have to renew it every year. It was due for renewal last year after expiring following 5 years, but of course we didn't have the Boat Arc Bash. So I'm in the process of finalizing this with the Texas Department of Transportation. It'll be signed off on by the city manager and be on record for the next 5 years. It just gives us permission to close state right-of-ways for this event. So we're asking for your approval of the resolution and the agreement.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
That motion carries. Thank you. Item 3, receive a report, hold a discussion, and conduct a public hearing to consider the proposed fiscal year 2022 budget.
Mayor, Council, Howdy Lisenby, City Manager. As part of our budget adoption process, we're required to hold at least one public hearing prior to the adoption of the budget, and adoption of the budget will actually happen on September 21st at our regular City Council meeting. Your staff team felt like it was prudent and wise to have at least 2 public hearings so we can put this in front of the community and have an opportunity for feedback. There have been a number of posts and communications that we've made online to the community. We've been able to develop some conversation and some feedback from the community about the budget as it is proposed. Honestly, there hasn't been much conversation, but we are trying to maintain transparency and keep this in front of the public while it is still under consideration. I won't go into as much detail as we did on our all-day workshop, but I do want to just touch a couple of high points for those in the audience and those watching online. Anytime we talk about the annual operating budget for our organization, we need to keep in mind the people that we're serving in this community, because every dollar we spend is their dollar. It's not my money, it's not staff's money, it's the community's money that they're entrusting to us to use to provide services for the benefit of the community. And this is not analysis from the 2020 census. We don't have that data, but the most recent data that we have from the U.S. Census Bureau is that we have approximately 2,837 households within our community. And looking at the percentages and the makeup of our community and who are the people that we're serving, 33% of those households are families. 7% appear to be married couples without children, 5% are singles, and 19% are seniors living alone. That 19% is, we feel, significant because that's 43% higher than the state average. So that gives us an idea of the makeup of our community. There's a significant senior population that live in our community that we need to be mindful of. Secondly, we also want to pay attention to the demographics, especially the economic indicators for our community. And 46% of our households live below $25,000 a year. Let me state that again. Almost half of our community has a household income of $25,000 a year or less. That's a very significant number. The median household income for these families is $28,000, $135 per year. That's 55% lower than the state average median household income. So at least half of our population live at or below what is considered by most to be a poverty line. That's significant when you're looking at the services that we provide to our community and the costs and the value that they're receiving for those services. And this is not necessarily the best analogy, but I'm not smart enough to come up with a better one. And so I like to talk about what something costs and also the value that you're getting for that cost. And so I'm a fan of Monster sodas. I paid $2 for that Monster, and I really like how it tastes. And for me, it's very effective at what I want it to do to help me stay awake and kind of stay mentally sharp going into a meeting. And at $2, I feel like I got a really good value. I would personally probably pay up to $4 for that drink because I like the way it tastes and it's effective for what I need it to be. So the cost is $2. I feel like I'm getting value for my money because it's an effective service. It does what I need it to do. The question for our budget is at what we are costing this community and the dollars, their dollars, we're asking them to give us to provide that service. Does the community feel like they're getting value for the cost, for the money they're giving us? Are we giving them value for that cost? And that's our charge as we evaluate our services, as we look at our budgets, is we're mindful of the costs, but we also have to be mindful of the value. And so this year, are we providing a higher level of service than we did last year? Are we providing more value this year than we did last year? And we're always looking for feedback from the community, and then we as staff are evaluating that constantly. And so within the budget document that's available online, just briefly, the two major funds or spending categories for our budget are the general fund, in which all the taxes come in, and those are the general services to our community, and the public utility fund, that's the other major fund that is for water, sewer, and trash services. The proposed budget for fiscal year 22 is $6,696,037. That is an increase of 15.9%, or an increase of $917,874. That is a very significant increase that we're proposing for the general fund. And the vast majority of that is going into people. 70% of our general fund budget, so for every dollar that the public gives us in the general fund, 70 cents is paying salary and benefits for the people that provide those services. And as we've talked in several of our workshops, the men and women of our public safety departments, primarily police, fire, and dispatch, on my worst day, they're the ones that are there. And so for our community and our citizens, generally on the worst day of their life and the worst moments of those worst days, public safety is probably involved in some form or fashion. And the pay that we were giving these critical employees in many cases was 19% below market rate. And the city has just fallen behind over the years. And frankly, we were not able to put together a budget to correct that problem, except for the federal funding that came through the American Rescue Plan, or ARP funding. And so we have proposed a strategy in which we can utilize ARP funding to bring them up to a market wage in year one and use those funds over a 3-year period so that we're not waiting 3 years to get them to a market wage. We can get them to a market wage now using that funding. But the challenge is over the next 3 budgets, we have to wean ourselves off of those dollars, because in year 4, those dollars are gone. And we still need public service employees that are there for you on your worst day. And I don't want those people to be some of the lowest paid, underappreciated employees in the region. And so the bulk of what we're doing in this general fund adjustment is paying people a fair market wage, and it's critical staff for the services that we provide. So the cost for those people is going to go up. I think you then also have to ask the value question. Well, if I'm going to have the same people this year as I did last year and they're costing me more, are those people going to be better? Because just because I pay them more doesn't instantly make them better at what they do. So included in this budget is some training dollars so that we can provide more training in special skills. It is equipment and supplies that they don't have right now to do their jobs. And so it is our goal in this budget to raise the level of service that we provide to this community while trying to minimize the cost that it is to the members of our public. Enterprise Fund, we're proposing a budget of $5,771,705. That's a 5% increase, an increase of about $276,000 to our public utility fund. I think anybody that was here in February, anybody that was in the state of Texas in February remembers the challenge that it provided. Our public utility did not fare well during that storm event, and much of that is the result of years of deferred maintenance. And so we have capital projects that will correct that, but you also have asked a staff of 3 people to maintain several hundred miles of water and sewer main that are buried in this town. And so we're behind on regular necessary maintenance. And so this budget asked for additional 3 staff members to double our team from 3 to 6. Again, we're not going to wave any magic wands with 3 additional people, but we will significantly be better able to manage and maintain the system in a way so that should Snowvid repeat itself, we will survive much better than we did before. And so while we are asking for additional dollars and cost is going up in these proposed budgets, we are aggressively pursuing value so that what the community is getting for those dollars is more substantial. And so finally, there's been a reorganization of our community development department. And so as most of us know, one of the challenges in Commerce is that we have a community of at least 9,000 people, and the tax base to support those 9,000 people is about $400 million. We'll talk about this again a little bit when we talk about the tax rate, but as a matter of comparison, the community of Melissa also has about 9,000 people. Their tax base is $1,400,000,000. So they've got $1 billion extra dollars of property value to support their 9,000 population. So they have to provide the same services, but they have a much larger tax base underneath them in which to pull resources. We have to provide the same services to a community, and just because a family lives at $28,000 a year doesn't mean they deserve less care or less services. So we have to be very creative in how we provide those services at value. And so the budget we presented has been out there for a couple of months. It is still available for discussion, and tonight is the first opportunity for the public to come in and speak with us about the budget as it's proposed. That's my Cliff's Notes overview and my summary of the budget and what we're asking to do. And Mayor, with that, I'll give you the floor and answer any questions or open the public hearing.
Council, do you have any comments or questions? No? Well, then I will open a public hearing at 6:14, and we will welcome comments from the public related to the budget. Anyone wish to speak? If not, I will close this public hearing at 6:15. And we shall,
Mayor, item number 4 was there just in case, based on questions you had or comments that were made, it will give you the opportunity to be responsive and request changes into the budget as it was presented. If y'all have no changes, item 4 is not necessary.
any council questions about item 4? If not, we'll move to item 5. Receive a report, hold a discussion, and conduct a public hearing to consider the proposed tax rate of 82 cents per $100 of assessed valuation as of January 1, 2021 for fiscal year 2022.
Mayor, Council, Howdy Lisenby, as we just discussed with the budget, the tax rate also requires at least one public hearing. Your staff felt like it was prudent and necessary to have 2 public hearings and opportunities for the public to speak about the proposed tax rate, because while we are keeping the tax rate the same, there will be some people, because of valuation changes, that will result in a tax increase. And so we want to be completely transparent about that and provide opportunities to discuss that. As we
Excuse
said,
me.
and you'll hear me multiple times say, we want to talk about cost versus value. 82-cent tax rate for a community is especially high. And there are not many cities in our region of the state that have a tax rate that high. But again, I think it's important to talk about why that is the case. We have about $400 million of value, which works out to be $42,345 of value per capita. The city of Greenville has a tax base of $2.36 billion. Their tax value per capita is $85,862 per person. So for every individual in Greenville, they have twice the value underneath them than what we do. City of Sulphur Springs has a $1 billion valuation. Their value per capita is $64,744. Paris has a $2 billion valuation. Their value per capita is $83,521. Reference the community of Melissa. They have a $1.4 billion valuation. Their value per capita is $150,000 per capita. Our value per capita is $42,000 per capita. And so effort's not the right word, but the effort required to provide the same service cost more here. As a point of reference, a 1-cent tax rate in Commerce will basically produce $40,000. A 1-penny tax rate in Greenville will produce $235,000. If we were to hire a brand new police officer, I would say salary and benefits, you should be looking at $55,000 to $60,000 for one police officer. We can't get that for a penny. Greenville can get 4 of them for a penny. And so it just talks about the challenges we have to control cost and yet still provide reliable services to this community, and your staff takes that very seriously. The no new revenue rate. State legislature plays with the vocabulary every other year. It makes it interesting. But basically, the no new revenue rate is whatever tax revenue we got last year, what tax rate today generates the exact same amount of revenue. So for us, the no new revenue rate would be 75.2 cents per 100. There's some hanging decimals, and Jamie really, really cares about those hanging decimals. So it's 0.752009 is the no new revenue rate. And so that would be the tax rate we could adopt that gives us the exact same amount of revenue we had last year from property taxes. The proposed rate that we're asking for is to maintain 82 cents of valuation, which is higher than the no new revenue rate. If your home value this year stays the same as it was last year, your taxes won't change. I doubt there's very many people that that's reality. Valuations change, so the same rate will produce a different tax bill. And so for the maintenance and operation rate, it's an additional 4.4 cents per $100 of valuation. Yes, there's some hanging decimals, Jamie. And then for the interest and sinking portion of that rate, it's an additional 2.4 cents per $100 of valuation. So the total tax difference between the no new revenue and our proposed is 6.8 cents per $100 of valuation. And so that's the tax rate that is being proposed, again, to support the services that we provide and the capital projects that we'll discuss here in just a little bit. And so with that, Mayor, those are our comments. We give you the floor for any questions or your public hearing.
I just want to make an observation. If our legislature decided to let state institutions make payments in lieu of taxes on their investments in cities, Howdy, what would that impact our total taxable value?
Our total taxable value would be $1.2 billion. So there's an $800 million difference within the city limits.
Now, speaking of services provided, the taxpayers of this city provide 24-hour fire protection for everyone in this city and every building in this city where it pays taxes or not.
That's correct.
Therefore, that's an expense that has no compensation whatsoever. So when we compare to these other cities, realize we're a very different city. And those of us who pay taxes here because we live here pay a load. And thank goodness we have, in the last few years, paid off long-term debt. We're able to create some new debt that we're going to be talking about that's going to let us do some things we've not dreamed about in years. So I'm very pleased with how we have progressed with our limitations. But I think that's an important part of the comparison to other cities.
Well, and for reference, if we were to calculate a pro rata share of the cost of the fire department for the university and the value they have on their campus, they would contribute $500,000 a year for fire protection. That's equivalent to a 13-cent tax rate. So in theory, our tax rate could be 13 cents lower if they were contributing just for fire service alone.
That's not something we talk about a lot, but it's important to understand in city finances because we have a lot of services to a lot of people who have no way of compensating us.
And so you have half of the residential homes in this community at or below the poverty line subsidizing fire services for a state university.
Okay, it is, let's see, we're gonna, do we need to hold a public hearing on this?
Public hearing, yes, sir.
Okay, at 6:23, I'll open a public hearing related to our tax rate, proposed tax rate. Anyone wish to speak? If not, I close this public hearing at 6:24. And we shall move on to item 7. Receive a report, hold a discussion, and conduct a public hearing on the proposed fiscal year 2022 capital improvement plan.
Mayor, Council, Howdy Lisenby, City Manager. Included with the proposed operating budget, we have a proposed capital improvement program, or what you'll hear us refer to CIP. I recognize we can have lots of acronyms that not everybody knows what they mean, and so we try to avoid throwing our jargon around without defining it. CIP is Capital Improvements Program. As you referenced, it's been a number of years since this community was able to invest community dollars in community infrastructure. And I think it's not hard to see that, looking at the conditions of our streets, the conditions of our parks. The city hall that was done almost 20 years ago is still in good shape. The public safety building that was done almost 20 years ago is in decent shape. The roof's got some problems. But there are other services that we need to provide to the community that we simply haven't had the opportunity to invest in those facilities. Because of the interest rate environment, we were able last meeting to direct our financial advisors to begin refunding the 2012 general obligation bonds that are out there, which will produce a significant savings for our annual debt service. And so that plus some of the, increased in valuations actually gives us about $6.5 million of capacity in this coming year to do capital projects. The conversation we've been having is, what do we do with that $6.5 million? Again, this may not be the best analogy in the world, but I'm not smart enough to come up with a better one. Many professional athletes that come out of college and sign multi-million-dollar contracts to play professional sports, when they stop playing professional sports, they're broke because they didn't know how to manage the money and the resources that they had. And if we're not careful, we can do the same thing. And so we can look up and say, wow, we can spend $6.5 million on something. I would just caution us continually that if we're going to spend that $6.5 million, it needs to be something that provides value and service to the community. You don't want to look up 3 years from now and go, what did we get for that? And so we've been focusing our conversations with you, the council, and us as a staff on projects within the CIP that provide value to this community and provide options. We've been discussing of the basic funding categories of street and drainage improvements. It's no secret that our streets need some love and care. We've been talking about improvements to the public library, the animal shelter, our parks and recreation systems, and then our downtown infrastructure. And so those have been the categories of expenditures that we've been talking about. In rough numbers, street and drainage improvements, last year we authorized $1.5 million in funding. We're working on the design for projects associated with those dollars. And so we've been talking of about $1.2 million in this coming year's funding for a total of about $2.5 million of street construction budget. We've been talking about approximately $800,000 in public library improvements. We've been talking about a new animal shelter, park improvements to our various park systems, and then various downtown improvements. And so to start that conversation, Mr. Allen is here with Friesen Nichols. He is our traffic and transportation engineer for these projects. We've been evaluating 8 different street segments. And so we have some, what I feel is very good and pertinent information that we want to present to the council as we discuss how we want to invest these capital dollars in the projects that are before us. So, Alan, thank you for being here. You have the floor.
Thanks, Howdy, and good evening, Mayor and Council. It's nice to be out in the country with y'all. And I've learned something tonight. I didn't realize that communities like Commerce paid the bill for colleges like A&M Commerce. So
Every state entity has that
so
opportunity or problem.
so anyway, I'll move on. There. So we first met back in May when I came out discussing the contract for the analysis of the streets that Howdy mentioned. We looked at several locations during June, July, took some photos, went back and prepared some cost estimates. Just recently, we've gotten some traffic counts on the various streets to kind of get an idea of how many people are using each one of these streets to kind of help with the development of recommendations, and that's kind of where we'll end up at the end of the discussion, talking about recommendations and question and answers. So just a little bit of background. Howdy mentioned earlier, you did your street condition survey back in 2019, 125 roadway segments, about 38 centerline miles of roadways. The average pavement condition score is about 31. And if you look at that graphic at the top right, 31 puts you basically in the unsatisfactory category of very, very poor condition streets. And that's a general graphic for most communities. And then the graphic below it is how streets degrade over time. The graph is pretty flat at the top, and then it has a pretty steep curve if you don't provide maintenance when it needs maintenance. Then they start degrading pretty fast, and then once they get to the point where they're in pretty poor shape, then they stay in pretty poor shape for quite a while if all you do is kind of fill in the potholes and just do basic maintenance like that. So back in May of this year, you approved our contract to look at several streets. We broke this up into 3 different categories. In conversations with Howdy, talking about streets that could be city streets that could be reconstructed, city streets that could receive some maintenance, and then some of the TxDOT roadways that provide a core travelway through the city that might need some maintenance as well. And I did contact the Parish District of TxDOT to ask them about Live Oak in Washington, and I'll fill you in on what I found out in a minute. So the city streets that we looked at, starting from the north and going to the south, and I apologize, these colors on my map looked better on my screen than they do on your screen, but I'm glad I circled the ones that I'm mentioning. But Bonham from Earl to Washington is the very top. Sycamore from Park to the railroad is just right below it to the right. Washington from Live Oak to Culver is right through the center. Hickory from Chestnut to Maple is off to the right. Monroe from Culver to Charity is right in the center down on the south end, and then Charity from State Highway 24 to Monroe are the 6 city streets that we looked at from a reconstruction standpoint. The streets that we looked at from a maintenance, the city streets that we looked at from a maintenance standpoint were Monroe from Live Oak to Walnut, there on the eastern edge of the college, and then Park from Maple to Culver. And that's the 2 yellow streets in the cloud. And then the TxDOT roads that we looked at and coordinated with TxDOT on were Live Oak, and these Business 224 from State Highway 24 to Washington, and Washington from Live Oak to the southern edge of downtown at Alamo. So just a few photos, and I agree with Howdy that the photos don't really do justice for how rough some of these streets are. Bonham is in pretty sad shape. It's got a lot of ups and downs. Curb and gutter is very broken up. Sycamore Street, here to the east of City Hall, is of all the streets that I looked at, is probably in for reconstruction is in better shape, but it's still not in great shape. Washington from Live Oak to Culver, you can see the cracking in the streets, and there have been some repairs that have been made. The curb and gutter is overgrown and overpaved, and a lot of times curb and gutter is broken up, pushed out. So there are a lot of things that need to be done to some of these streets. Hickory Street is a street that, if you look to the right-hand side of the photo, there's some new home construction or townhome construction, some type of new construction out there that the construction traffic has further damaged the street. And then Monroe from Culver to Charity, it's just a narrow asphalt roadway with the open drainage that it's pretty broken up. It's got a lot of alligator cracking and potholes and all, pretty much the whole length of it from Culver to Charity. I hope it wasn't one of those hanging decimals. So and then the last one is Charity, from 24 to Monroe, and this street has a couple of different things in it that the other streets don't have. The top right photo is the 290-degree dogleg turns in it that if we were to do something to the street, then we would want to take those two turns out. And then there's a 6-foot diameter box culvert in the creek. The bottom right-hand photo shows how the pipe was shored up and improved on the upstream end, but it didn't receive the same treatment on the downstream end, and so there's no guardrail, there's no safety fencing on the downstream side. So that would be something that we would want to fix while we were out there as well. And then, so the two city streets that we looked at from a maintenance standpoint is Monroe from Live Oak to Walnut, and it's the street that was widened, sidewalks were put in, curb and gutter. It's in good shape. There are a few areas where the pavement is failing that would need some full depth repair, but for the most part it just needs to be crack sealed and have the weeds kind of taken out of the crack growing between the pavement and the concrete curb and gutter, because that tends to break the pavement down at the edge, and it's good to get that out of there. There are some areas on the south end of the street that are in worse shape than the rest of it, but it's an area, I think maybe one block, where there weren't a whole lot of improvements done as there were on the other section. And then Park Street from Maple to Culver is the second one that we looked at from a maintenance standpoint. The street's in pretty decent shape, except for one block through the park. The pavement is kind of pushing on the western edge. It's holding water. So that section is one that we looked at from a standpoint of doing a little bit more work to it to make it better. Sorry. So from a cost standpoint, and these are going in the same order as the list and the photos. Bonham Street we looked at, and so from the cost estimate standpoint, these first numbers that you're seeing are if we were to go back and basically just put back, you know, what you have. If it's a 20-foot street, we're going to put back a 20-foot street, and these estimates are typical rebuilding, rehabbing streets like this. They have a 8 to 10, 12-year lifespan. So some of them, I mean, like Hickory is $120,000. That doesn't sound like a whole lot of money, but I mean, 10 years from now, you probably have to be doing something to it again, unless you were to do something more to it now. So Bonham is about a $655,000 estimate to reconstruct the 29-foot asphalt street, and some of these you'll see they're 29 feet, 24 feet, 28 feet. The street width's kind of varied in the areas that we looked at. So reconstruct the asphalt with concrete curb and gutter. Sycamore would be the same thing, $535,000. There is a storm drainage system that crosses there at Locust that we would need to improve some of the storm sewer inlets. Washington Street from Live Oak to Culver is a $1.1 million estimate. That's the base bid. Howdy asked me to include sidewalks. That's a section of roadway that's got about a 2-foot concrete strip behind the curb. It's not really wide enough for a sidewalk. So we're going to take that out and not put it back. Then we'll take it out and put it back at 2 feet, and it doesn't really serve a purpose. So we provided an estimate to add sidewalks, and that would be about a $1.9 million project on Washington. Hickory, as I mentioned, is 120.
Let me echo that right quick, Alan. Just adding sidewalks to that project adds $800,000. And we hear a lot of comments from the public at large, why don't we do sidewalks? Well, if I can do a street project for $1.1 million and adding sidewalks adds $800,000 to it, that's a significant cost. And so many times it's not as simple as, we'll just put a sidewalk there. It's a lot more complex than just put a sidewalk there. And that costing is a good example of that point. Thank you, Alan. Keep going.
Exactly, and it's not just sidewalks. I mean, when you start putting in pedestrian components like sidewalks, then you have to meet the Americans with Disability Act guidelines, which means that when you put a sidewalk across a driveway, then the slope of the sidewalk can only be 2% across the sidewalk. So that means if you're putting in a sidewalk adjacent to the curb, that you have to put it in on a pretty flat slope up against the curb, and you end up reconstructing most of the driveways along the street as well. So, and that's a section of roadway that's got some retaining walls on it now. So that would require probably more retaining walls and higher retaining walls by pushing the roadway and the improvements a little closer to the homes. So that's kind of, it is the sidewalk cost. I mean, sidewalks are expensive, but it's other things that go with the sidewalk as well. Hickory was $120,000, basically just to reconstruct the 18-foot asphalt street out there with no curb and gutter. You'd have the same roadside drainage as you do now. Monroe from Culver to Charity. I broke it into 2 pieces just in the event that, you wanted to kind of pick and choose. So the section from Culver to, I'm calling it Charity North. There's the section of Charity that heads east. So Culver to Charity North is about $255,000, and Monroe from Charity to Charity is about $100,000, and that's basically just to reconstruct. One section is 19 feet, one section is 20. That's also with roadside ditches and no curb and gutter. And then Charity, same thing, 19 to 20 feet of asphalt, no curb and gutter. We would improve the turns. We might need to acquire a little right of way here and there. I don't know without looking at it, but about $420,000 for that. I guess that's your.
And after I got these cost numbers, I asked Alan to go back, and for the benefit of our conversations tonight, we're talking specifically Monroe from Culver all the way to Charity South. And so if we replace what's there with what's there, you're looking at about $350,000 to $400,000 for the full length of Monroe all the way down to Charity. But that's to put back what's there. If we take that and reconstruct it to a fully designed street with curb and gutter and the stormwater drainage improvements that would be necessary, that's this next cost number. So you're going from a $400,000 project to a $3.3 million project if you're going to make it a full street with curb and gutter and all the drainage. So, Alan.
And this is a street we estimated twice as much asphalt on it so that it would last more than 10 years. So it should be like a 20-year life street. So it is one that would give you more value as long as it was maintained throughout its lifespan. But it would be to widen the roadway approximately 10 feet. You would lower it in order to get the drainage from the properties on either side to drain to the street, and then you'd put your underground storm drainage system in. Would require likely some other utility relocations depending on what's out there, and that's something that we can we can look at if that's the option that you choose. So on the maintenance side, the first maintenance number is a whole lot better than any of the reconstruction numbers. But Monroe from Live Oak to Walnut, where really you just need to crack seal and some pavement repairs, it's about $55,000. It's not a big project. The two sections of Park are more expensive, and we estimated replacing the curb and gutter because the drainage doesn't flow very well. The gutters have been filled with asphalt over the years, and I think that's part of the reason that the section through the park is failing, is because it's holding water. Water can't get to the creek. So we estimated replacing curb and gutter, replacing a 2 to 5 foot strip adjacent to the curb and gutter, and then in the section through the park, we would reconstruct from the creek to Aldridge about a third of the width. I mean, it's pushing off to the west, and then from Aldridge to Culver, we estimated same thing, replacing the curb and gutter. We'd do an edge repair from 2 to 5 feet of width, and also try to take some of the hump out of the Aldridge intersection that's so rough when you go over it. So those are roughly $400,000 each. And then the TxDOT roadways, Live Oak Street, I did talk to or exchanged emails with Tommy Henderson at the TxDOT Parish District. It's on their list for this fiscal year. Sometime, they didn't tell me when, it's sometime between September the 1st and August the 31st of next year that they would do a mill and inlay. And basically what that is, they would mill the top 2 inches off, top 2 to 3 inches off, and then they would just fill that back in with new asphalt. So it would be a new surface on Live Oak Street. Washington Street is not on their current plan to do any maintenance, and it's in okay shape. I mean, it could use some maintenance. We were suggesting a mill and inlay there as well, take some of the asphalt out of the curb and gutter, but it's not anything that's on their current plan. And then Howdy had mentioned that, and mentioned as part of your capital improvement programs, the downtown area and an upgrade of downtown, possibly redoing some of the sidewalks downtown. TxDOT has a transportation alternative program that will pay up to 80% of the cost for sidewalk projects like that, whether, you know, in downtown areas like here in Commerce. It's something that you have to put in an application for, and it'd be a call for projects, and you know, if your numbers are competitive with everybody else's, it would typically get funded. But that's something that's probably a year and a half or so away before a call for projects, and it kind of depends on, you know, how much money TxDOT gets from the infrastructure bill that everybody keeps talking about. You know, how big is it going to be, and when's it going to be around? So that's something that you could, if you chose to, wait and try to partner with TxDOT on and use some of the state and federal monies to do the downtown sidewalks. So moving on to traffic counts to kind of further define, you know, which streets we might want to do. This was an app that Howdy mentioned to me, and I found out from our traffic guys that they use it quite a bit on things like this. So it was new to me, but typically you'll see, you know, a typical traffic count. Somebody will throw a tube, they call it a tube count, but they throw the little black thing across the road and you drive over it and it counts you. Well, this one, they don't count it, they measure it, and it's, if I, like, they measure it from a cell phone. And so if you don't want people using your data, you probably should leave your cell phone at home. But so they count the number of times people go up and down the street by using the location services on your cell phone. So we have we got the traffic data for the 6 streets to be reconstructed and the two streets for maintenance. And just to kind of explain, so the little blue hexagon or whatever shape that is where we got the counts. So on Bonham, we got a count on each end. So basically what that's telling you, if you add those two numbers together and divide it by 2, that's the average daily traffic in 2021 on Bonham Street. So about 1,040, so 520 cars per day each direction. I'm sorry, 540 cars, 270 cars each direction. So same thing on Sycamore. One of them, the east end, was a lower number, which is understandable, and there's several streets between the railroad and Park Street that would contribute to the higher number on the west end. So 1,900 total, so 950 average. So Washington is you know, there by the university is about 2,000 cars per day. It's lower than that on the south end. Monroe, south of Culver, I found these interesting. We took 3 counts on that. So the 2 counts, the one just south of Culver and the one just north of the eastern section of Charity, were about 2,000 vehicles per day, and then the one Monroe on the south end going towards Charity is about 1,000, and then Charity is about 1,000 per day. So, which would lead me to believe that the people coming on Charity are going south and continuing on Charity.
Yeah.
So, and then the traffic counts for the maintenance. So Monroe Street there by the university is got a lot of traffic, you know, about 9,500 vehicles divided by 2, so 4,700 cars per day on Monroe Street, and about 2,800 cars per day on Park Street. So those 2 streets carry a significant amount of traffic. So then we get to the recommendations part, and I'm not sure how you want to handle this, Howdy, but we can talk about it, or
I asked him to leave it blank, and he was like, "You want me to leave it blank?" Because engineers usually expect you to ask them to make a recommendation, and so my main goal for this time this evening is to put some of these cost numbers in front of you, let you see the traffic counts, and then let's kind of have our conversation about streets. And so I'll remind you that based on the CIP that we've been discussing, using last year's dollars plus what we had proposed in this year's dollars, is that we were talking about $2.5 million of money for street construction in this version of the CIP. But then layering out over the next 3 years, we were looking at about $8 to $10 million total that we could invest in streets over a 5-year period, with the first phase of construction being about $2.5 million. Well, for example, if we wanted to do Washington from Live Oak all the way to Culver, and we wanted to have some kind of sidewalks in there, you're looking at almost $2 million. So if we had $2.5 million of street money, that's $2 million for that street segment. And then I highly recommend that we do the maintenance on Monroe and maybe some of the maintenance on half of Park. People will stop and ask, well, we just built that street next to the university not too long ago. Why do we want to spend more money on it? Why don't we get the university to spend money on it? Well, if you hold your breath waiting on that to happen, you'll die for lack of oxygen. But I would refer you to one of those beginning charts that shows the life cycle of a street. That street segment right now is in good condition. And if we just spend $50,000 to $60,000, we can keep it in good condition for another 5 to 10 years. And that is 4,000 to 4,500 cars a day on that segment of road. So for $50,000, $60,000, we can keep that street in good shape for another 10 years. Some of these other segments, it's going to take $700,000 to get it in good shape for the next 10 years because we waited so long. And so while it may be unpopular to spend money on a brand new street next to the university, if we don't spend it now, 5 years from now, it's not going to be $60,000. It's going to be $240,000. If you wait another 5 years, it's $1 million. And so it behooves us that the roads that are in good shape, we need to give them some attention so that we can keep them in good shape. And the traffic count just accentuates that 4,000 cars a day travel that segment of Monroe. I would suggest a lot of that traffic is university related, but still, it doesn't take much money to keep that street in good condition. But the first question on the table for council is, are you comfortable with $2.5 million of funding in this first phase of the CIP? Because that would really allow you to do Washington and some maintenance. Or would you want to do $3.5 million and maybe do Monroe and some maintenance? But no, you've got $8 to $10 million over a 4 to 5 year period that we're not going to do all of them at once, but we need a plan because based on traffic counts, these are the most highly traveled roads in our community, and many of them significantly need reconstruction. And so before we talk about any of the other projects, I wanted to start with streets, because if we're comfortable with $2.5 million on streets, then that tells us kind of what our budget is for some of these other facilities that we're going to talk about. But based on these numbers, if you wanted to do Washington and Charity, then we need more than $2.5 million. If you want to do Washington, you want to do Washington or Washington plus sidewalks. That speaks to how much of the funding allocation we want to put into our streets. I would submit that of all the projects that are in front of us, streets is going to benefit and impact more of our community than any other project that we talk about. But we've got money over 4 to 5 years to really take a bite out of that elephant. How big of a bite do we want to take in this first year? Your staff is prepared to do whatever size bite you want us to chew and swallow, we can. Have that on good faith from Jamie. But in light of the other needs of our community, I don't want to throw all $6 million at streets this year, because then you start talking value. Half of the population of our community really needs some services that we don't provide right now. And so we need to invest in facilities that allow that to happen, or invest in places that are going to produce more growth and more development, because that $400 million tax base, we need to grow that to $500 million or to $600 million. We got to start growing that base, and where we invest these street dollars can lead directly to more investment in tax base. And so, yes, I have ideas in my mind of what I would recommend, but I really wanted to have a conversation, and then maybe together we end up on recommendations. And so, Mayor, I give you and the council the floor.
Council, it's time to talk. What are your thoughts?
I have one question. When we did Monroe Street in the past, we stopped at Walnut. Why are we stopping at Walnut when the traffic still goes to Culver Street? We have 2 blocks that we leave every time.
Did the university participate? Did the university participate in that street project?
I don't
They
know.
did.
They probably did.
There's a $4 million project, $2 million from a city bond, $1 million from the state, $1 million from the university, which also is state.
Yeah.
But that was the last participation.
I would assume that since it doesn't the university doesn't continue all the way to Culver, they only participated in the part that was bordering them, and that's why the project stopped.
All right. Well, my question is why do we not have that on the table now? I think that is because when we go over to Park Street, when you get at Culver and Park, there's that, we have a conglomeration of water there, and we have a problem there. We have the same problem at Culver and Monroe Street. you cannot use the sidewalks there. You cannot use the sidewalks over on Park Street because you are going through a lake and you cannot get there. And then the water is running so fast there, you can't cross. But so I guess my question there is, if we're going to deal with Monroe Street, why are we not going all the way to Culver Street?
I didn't put it on the list because I felt like if we were going to look at Monroe, turning south from Culver and going south down Monroe, if we could improve that street, I think it opens up, because there's very little land that we have in the community that's within our city limits that's, what I'll say, ripe for development. And if I'm asking a developer to put in a subdivision there at the bottom of Monroe where it meets Charity, there's land there. We have utilities underground there. You could do a subdivision there very reasonably.
The
But the
cost,
street's in bad shape.
yeah, the maintenance cost, well, and that's reconstruction we're talking about there.
Yep.
But I'm talking about maintenance, and we're talking about from Monroe, from Live Oak to Walnut on Monroe. We're talking how much? Was it, how much?
55,000.
55? And 2 more blocks?
Well, you would probably, at a minimum, do a mill and inlay, assuming the base is good underneath there, but we can go back and add that to the evaluation. We didn't evaluate it in this first phase.
I just feel like it's a major
Yeah.
turn there, and we're just not, we're gonna cause ourselves problems down the road.
I
Other
can,
comments?
and I can develop a cost estimate for that one. I'll take a look at it on my way out tonight.
Okay, and so okay, now on Monroe from Culver to Charity. Now, I'm the one that said, let's put out there and let's look at sidewalks. If the cost, I mean, if I were living on that street, I definitely would want, and I hope somebody's here tonight, and if they're not, they should be. There are no curbs. I live on a street on Taylor Street that used to have curbs, and now
They're still under that.
well, they're under there somewhere. But that's what the water is flowing into our homes. If you start looking at, and I'm not into our homes, but under our homes, because all of us are on Pier and Beam over there. But I guess my thing is if we're going to have traffic going down that road because of development, that we need to protect the ones up the road from there by making sure that they have curbs. And there's no drainage at the top part, or I'm going to say the top part, from Culver to, what about Tanglewood? And then from Tanglewood on down, then there's those big gullies there. And God forbid we don't have anybody that would go over those edges there, and you'll turn your car over for sure. But we constantly are having problems in those areas because we're not going out and digging those out because there is so much silt that keeps going there. So if we're going to put money into reconstruction, I would say looking at putting more money into that area. I still can't figure out where Bonham Street is a major street. I feel like Aldridge probably has more traffic than Bonham Street does.
I'll take the fall for that one because the axiom, the squeaky wheel gets some grease. I hear more complaints and I hear more conversations from anybody in town. Bonham, I hear more from than anywhere else in the community. So I at least wanted to see what a number was so I could go back to them and say $700,000.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And the reason why we did our study is so that we would keep this issue from squeaky wheels.
Yeah.
Because we want to do the right thing with the money that we have.
Agreed.
So I feel like if we're looking at trying to using our money effectively, let's get the ones where it's going to build us, with the traffic that we have and the drainage problem, and then getting us down Monroe Street where we think we might be able to get someone to develop.
I would agree, and I think also that the traffic counts validate that traffic on Bonham is not nearly as high as they would lead everybody to believe, and so that factors into our decision matrix.
Now, when is Hickory Street? When are they supposed to be finished with that? the
We
development?
either, I think we gave them temporary COs because there's a little bit of work left on their parking lot. But I believe they already have people moving in and taking up
Okay,
residence.
good.
And the commitment there was, you had a landowner and a developer that put in probably close to $1 million of development in that short little block. And when the cement trucks were coming in to do the foundations for those buildings, it completely destroyed the road. I have to admit, that's not the contractor's fault, because a number of years ago, the city went in Hickory, cut it open, replaced the sewer line, and then in my professional opinion, didn't patch it right. And so the base underneath that cut was not prepared for the weight of a cement truck. And so that whole street was lost, frankly, because the city didn't repair a utility cut correctly. Well, now we've got an investor that's put in over $1 million in residential development in our community, and the street looks like a war zone. Well, if we leave it like a war zone, the next developer is going to be very hesitant to put in another $1 million because the streets aren't going to be taken care of. And so I feel it's very important that we redo that segment of Hickory, and for $120,000, $150,000, we're just putting back what's there with what's there. We're not upgrading the curb and gutter and all of that stuff, but I think that's an investment that sends a message to those that are willing to invest. If developers want to upgrade their portion of the street, they can participate in curb and gutter and things like that, but we'll at least protect and preserve the street that's in front of them when they do an investment.
Other comments?
On your study, you said that a lot of this was about cell phone.
The traffic counts.
Yeah. Streetlight, Streetlight reached out to me a couple of months ago. It was one of those cold call emails, and when I got the email, I was tempted to throw it away because I assumed they were going to try to sell me streetlights. And then I was like, well, I'm not going to throw it away because we have areas of town that desperately need streetlights. So I opened it up and found out that it has absolutely nothing to do with streetlights. What they do is every cell phone in the world now has some kind of geolocation service. Many people will turn it off. Most people don't. And so they go to the cell phone providers and they buy this data in bulk that's been sanitized. They have no idea this phone is mine. All they know is there's a device that moves around, and based on that data, they can tell whether it's a pedestrian, if it's a bicycle, or if it's a car. And so for what we needed and the speed at which we needed to gather it, it was cheaper and more cost effective to get the data they already had, analyze it, and get these traffic accounts. Would we get more accurate data with a tube test? Yes. It would take longer and probably cost more. So a quick analysis, it was very fast. A somewhat related note, I'm working with Streetlight on a separate deal to get data from them, because while I had them online doing a demo, I asked them, just out of curiosity, can you tell me how many devices start outside of Commerce, come to Commerce to work, and then leave and go somewhere else? And in 30 seconds, he had it pulled up and on a map, and I could see exactly how many people or how many devices work in Commerce but don't live in Commerce. And so I'm gonna buy that data, and I'm gonna buy that map, because that's very powerful information to have. So I don't know that it's Bob's cell phone. I just know there's a cell phone and it's moving around.
The reason I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
The reason I ask that is, I'm looking at Bonham. Just say, for instance, you got 15 cars to go down the street and 8 people in each car, and all of them got a cell phone.
Yeah.
That's going to skew your numbers. That's the reason why I was asking.
The analysis that they do is if it's a clump of them traveling the same deal, they count it as one.
Okay.
And traffic counts are going to vary, even if you took a tube count. I mean, if you we try to take all of our tube counts during the school year, but last year would have been, during COVID, so people are going remotely to school, so that's going to skew your traffic count. So traffic counts over the last couple of years are anybody's best guess as far. I mean, you can get them, but I mean, if you were to take the same count again next year during the school season when everything is hopefully calmed down some, then you might get a totally different number.
As an anecdote, the other question that I asked them during the demo was about pedestrian traffic, and I said, where are the people walking in our community? And so he ran the quick query, and if you believe the first pass of the data, nobody in town walks except at Walmart, because the numbers were so incredibly high at Walmart. And he said, well, we would have to take a little bit of time and factor Walmart out of the discussion so that you have some meaningful data, because everybody walking around Walmart is pedestrian traffic because it's so large. So we're going to get pedestrian data. We just have to factor Walmart out of it.
Yeah.
That's good too.
Yeah.
Other comments, questions?
The cost on Sycamore Street that we were talking about, that doesn't include widening it, does it? Because y'all were going to look at seeing if we could even widen it.
Well, for this part of the evaluation, it was to replace what's there with what's there.
What's there?
Correct.
Part of my concern with Sycamore is, and I think the traffic count will probably bear this out, I submit that one of the primary routes for people to get in and out of the Norris community is down Sycamore. And that was not designed as a thoroughfare. It's narrow as a residential street. In my opinion, it's too narrow for the volume of traffic. And see if I can stop some of that noise. I wanted to look at, first glance, what would it take to just replace what's there. If we're going to do Sycamore, it needs to be widened. If you widen it, every utility pole down Sycamore is going to have to get relocated. That project is going to require more study than what we've put into it at this point. It's not, in my recommendation, at the top of the list. It stays on the list because it's a thoroughfare. A lot of people come in and out of the Norris community from that route. I think we need to recognize that and improve that street. It's just going to be more expensive than the number in front of you, but it's going to require more engineering as well.
On Sycamore, since you're on that, I believe, personally, I think it's wide enough. I think the problem's parking on that street. If we got the parking under control, that street's plenty wide enough, and then we can do an overlay and be done.
We can get on that, Chief.
Other comments? I want to make a couple of observations. I agree with Stephanie that piece of Monroe that has been neglected is going to have to be addressed someday, and this might be the time to do it as we look at a partial reconstruct and then a maintenance on the rest of Monroe. I think that's worth looking at. Another thing is the majority of people who actually study this will say, where's Hickory Street? What has that got to do with it? You've explained its uniqueness, but I want to emphasize that the council has decided to incentivize investment east of Park Street. And by golly, somebody took us up and they built 5 brand new duplexes that are quite expensive, and due to that previous repair, those concrete trucks just ripped that street up. If you've not been down it, I would suggest you do that. But the people who now are moving in there, when it starts raining, they're going to be driving through a mud hole to get to their new fine home. So I do think it's a responsibility of the council to address that long-term error that we didn't create, but since we are incentivizing investment and we want much more of it, I think we have to take care of that. Other comments or questions?
Not for today, but I would like to see, for us to be able to look at for preparing for the next budget cycle, so that we see what the maintenance streets are on the list, and which ones were considered. I know we have major streets, they're feeder streets, and then we have, you know, the other types of streets. If we could see where those fall in, and so that we can be starting to prepare ourselves to, on what we need to be doing next.
Prior to the discussion about that section of Monroe, I agree with you, and that was an oversight. We'll get some numbers on that. Prior to that, it was going to be my recommendation that we consider Washington from Live Oak down to Culver and the maintenance projects, and then begin design on either Monroe or Charity. One of those two I think we need to begin design on, so that when and if there appears to be development that's ready, we're ready as well. And then beyond that, we can take more bites over the next 3 or 4 years as y'all have the appetite for. But I think before we make any recommendations, I would like to give some time to go back and get some cost numbers for that short segment of Monroe and see what that does to the calculus.
Does, on Monroe, the southern part that we're talking about, doesn't the university own a lot of that on that right-hand side? That's between,
They've bought a number of those residential lots.
yeah,
Well, they own Meredith housing there.
that old housing.
Wait a minute.
or
Let's talk
that
about this.
property there. So, I mean,
On
Wonder-
Monroe, north of Culver?
no,
No,
south of Culver.
Culver is,
south. South on the
That
front.
Yeah.
long
Culver
stretch of
Tanglewood.
just grassy area.
there by Brookshire's was
Yes.
where
That is
South
theirs.
Apartments were years
Right.
ago.
University owns all of that.
Right. Right.
Maybe we should be talking to them. I know
Gonna
that's
hold my
holding our
breath,
breath.
but we'll ask them.
I sure think we should always put it in there.
Okay. Now, is it time for a public hearing on this?
Well, no, we've got some more projects to talk over, but we wanted to start with streets, because it's one of the biggest pieces, but also if we're through talking streets, I'm gonna let Alan head on back home to his family. So, do y'all have any other questions of Alan while we have him here?
Thank you.
Well, we
welcome.
appreciate it very much. You make our decisions more justifiable. Thank you.
Well, glad to help.
Well, it is.
All right.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
y'all.
you.
Y'all have a good evening.
Mayor, Council, as we keep moving through the proposed CIP, the next project that I want to talk about, because I have new information since the last time we talked, is the public library. As you know, the city owns the library building. The city does not operate the library. It's operated by the Friends of the Library. And the building is historic. It's over 100 years old. It was originally a post office that has been repurposed. And so we started this conversation simply talking about ADA access. As the Friends of the Library continue to operate and visit about the services that they're going to provide, I will give another anecdote. Personally, my view of the importance of libraries. I've been in city management for 20 years, and quite honestly, if it wasn't for a library, I wouldn't be in this career. It's somewhat of a comical story, but coming out of college, I was in banking, and I was going to spend my life as a banker. Vast dreams of greatness. And a friend of mine said, hey, there's a small community looking for a city manager. Do you want to apply for that job? And I honestly didn't know what a city manager was 20 years ago. I'd never heard of a city manager. I didn't have a clue. I had a business degree, but didn't know what they did. And the only prerequisite it had was that you had to have a business degree, and I had one of those. So I put my name in the hat, mainly to keep my friend happy, because they went to the effort to recommend it to me. So I put my name in the hat, and they called me and set up an interview. And so I agreed to interview and still had no clue what in the world a city manager was. But the community had a library. So I went to the library and spent a good portion of an entire day pulling every book I could find off the shelf about city government and city management. And just like when I was in college, I crammed for that final like it was nobody's business. And went into that interview and quite honestly faked it. And at the ripe old age of 25 years old, I was literally the youngest city manager in the state of Texas. And I would have never landed that job if it wasn't for a library that had a couple of books on the shelf. I reference back to the demographics of our community, that half of our community live at or below the poverty level. We have a significant portion of our community that needs access to the resources that give them opportunities to improve their life and their conditions for their families, for their kids, for their grandkids. And libraries can and should play a very pivotal role in that part of our society. In my opinion, it's hard for the Friends of the Library to provide that service because of the condition of the building in which they operate. And so it is a priority of mine to keep this in front of us. And so we had an architect come in and we did some evaluations. And we actually developed 3 different options of what it would take to get ADA access, and could we also have ADA accessible restrooms on the first floor. We've had conversations with the Texas Historical Commission, also known as the Texas Hysterical Commission. And we found out that from their opinion, because the loading dock that is on the back side of that building was not original to the building, we kind of have a full suite of options of what we want to do to get access into the rear of the building, and also put restrooms at the rear of the building because it's easiest to get utilities in there. Bottom line, the design option that creates a rear entrance that's ADA accessible and provides for a restroom and presents a similar facade to the building that's there is about $500,000. And for another $100,000, it makes some improvements to the parking lot back there. So for about $600,000, we can accomplish an architecturally attractive entrance to the rear, improve the parking lot, provide ADA access, and provide an accessible restroom on the first floor. And we gave you a budget of about $800,000. So $600,000 achieves our primary objective and then allows $200,000 for some very needed improvements to the interior of the library to take that 100-year-old structure and let it continue to serve this community in a very important and vital way. And so I continue to say $800,000 is the right number for this project, and we now have architectural evaluation and preliminary designs that validate that. I'm happy to answer any questions, but it is my recommendation that we maintain $800,000 of funding for our public library.
Those inside improvements were to take care of the water problems that we have, and as well as painting?
Yes.
One of the things that I had mentioned in our previous meeting was the public restrooms downtown.
Yes.
And so is there an opportunity to expand the restrooms there at the library and use some of that downtown funding to do that and make that the public restrooms for the downtown area and fix it so that it's driving traffic through the library to promote the library as people are going to the restroom? Your restrooms would only be open during the library hours,
Yeah.
or for special events,
Yeah.
up to a point. But now you've got downtown restrooms, adding traffic, foot traffic to the library. Just a thought.
My initial input is yes, it's doable. You'd sacrifice parking lot to accomplish it. And so that would be a question for the Friends of the Library. Since they're operating it, they would lose parking spaces, and parking is at a premium in our downtown. It can be done, and in terms of cost, we'd have to to run some numbers, but bathrooms are the most expensive real estate you're gonna put in a commercial building. It could be done. You'd sacrifice parking spaces to do it, and that would be a critical part of that conversation. I probably want some input from the Friends of the Library. If they want the foot traffic and are willing to give up parking lot, we can explore it. If they would like to preserve parking, I think there are other ways for us to get restrooms in the downtown besides that. It's definitely an interesting idea. All right. I'm going to move on to the animal shelter. I guess I underestimated the interest in this community of an animal shelter. But when we started talking about the need to put together a CIP plan, my first thing was to look at projects that we had already been talking about. And there's already been some discussion about a new animal shelter. Looking at the shelter that we have, the condition in which it lives today, I also think that it is something that is needed for our community. But I had some concerns. One about whether it was a project that the community would prioritize. One of the things that we've done, we're working, I don't think aggressively is the right word, but we have increased our focus on how we communicate with the community and also how we can hear back from the community more than just the people that call us. And so one of the things we do is we have a software platform that tracks social media discussions. And we've been using it for probably 2 months now. I will say, based on the numbers, the single hottest topic in this community was the closure of the emergency clinic. There were thousands and thousands and thousands of social media interactions about that. Fortunately, that wasn't our call, and we didn't initiate that one. But the number 2 conversation in this community is animals and animal shelter. It is a very hot topic, and it is discussed greatly. Using this platform, we're going to have the ability to put out very brief, very quick 3-question surveys throughout the year. And so our very first one was asking the community, would you support a new shelter? If so, what would you like to see in the shelter? The company that does this called us within 2 weeks. They called us within 2 weeks. They have clients like San Antonio. They have clients that are major metropolitan areas. And they said in 2 weeks, our 3-question survey generated more feedback than any of their large metropolitan customers will get in multiple weeks, and we did it in 3 days. And so we've had over 400 responses, and 85% of those responses strongly favor this project. And so that kind of settled my first fear, is this a project the community would endorse? I think it has been a resounding yes so far. There's still more time on the survey, but it's been incredibly popular. That then created a whole new fear for me that has cost me some sleep. We've been using a budget of $1.2 million because that was the number that staff put together probably 4 years ago, 3.5 years ago. And so then I really began to lose sleep at night that, okay, the community supports this. I've now created an expectation within the community that this is going to happen. Is $1.2 million the right number? And so I've been doing some research and talking to some people I know in the construction industry. $1 million construction, but a $1.2 million budget is not $1.2 million of construction. It's $1 million of construction, $200,000 of design and soft costs. Jamie's my math person, so she'll yell at me if I'm wrong. So how much animal shelter can we get for $1 million? Right now, animal shelters that are being built are around $250 per square foot. So $1 million construction budget using $250 per square foot is going to get you about 4,000 square feet of animal shelter. Our animal shelter right now is about 2,000 square feet. So we could double the size of the shelter. But does that square footage give us what we think the community needs? The answer is it probably needs to be closer to 5,000 square foot, not 4,000 square foot. So my honest opinion, I don't think $1.2 million is enough. I think it probably needs to be 1.5 to 1.8 because of what construction costs are right now. I can't promise you that it will never happen, but it is my greatest fear in life to bring you a budget and get you to approve a project and then come back and say I was wrong and that's not enough money. And so before we approve any plans and approve any projects, I want to make sure this number is a good number. I honestly don't think 1.2 is the right number. I think 1.5 to 1.8 is the right number for the shelter that this community needs and the services that we provide. And so if we're going to talk about a shelter, I think that's the number. I would say 1.8 is the number, not 1.2. And that's different than the conversations that we've had. And so before we talk parks, before we talk downtown, I wanted some conversation there as well. So I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
So are we talking about giving the same service like with the county as well? Or is that part of the discussion that we need to deal with?
It's part of the discussion we've had. I had a meeting with the county judge and the sheriff, and they would like a different level of service than what we have under our current agreement. We told them that the costs would change and that any service that we provide to the county, they have to pay for. We will not subsidize these services to county residents. And so if they want a higher level of service than they're getting right now, they have to fund it. We will not subsidize it. And so they're taking some time to evaluate what they need in this area of the county, and then we're going to go back and tell them what it would cost to provide that service, and then look at renegotiating that interlocal agreement. Right now, they give us how much? They give us $70,000 a year, and the agreement is we will receive animals from the county. In practice, what they ask us to do is they ask us to respond out into the county, and we're not staffed at that level. And so if we can, we do, but it's rare. Most of the time we're not available, and they want us to be available. And so we feel like they probably need to staff that. But there will be conversations. But
So how much paw traffic do we get from the county versus the city?
Chief, do we have any numbers on that, or we can?
Yes. So as we're designing or thinking about it, we're going to have to make sure that, or as a taxpayer, I would like us to make sure that it is it's staffed and the size of it is based on what we want in our city. And then if we're going to do the county, that they understand that this is all the space they have, and all the service that they're going to get from us.
I would say, and again, these are very preliminary numbers. I don't have a full evaluation to support it. But if we were going to design a shelter just for our community, I'm probably comfortable with the 4,000 square foot number. But if it's for us and the volume we get from the county, it needs to be bigger than that. And I think they need to participate in the construction cost of that bigger facility and the staffing to serve them. And that will be our conversation with them when the time comes.
Okay.
I think that's valid, because their annual contribution certainly won't pay for the additional, if they're at 40%. I just find that not feasible for us.
Well,
to
and I
plan.
come back to the position that the demographics of our community, half of our community lives at or below the poverty level, and we're asking them to subsidize county services.
Right.
Right.
That just is not feasible and sustainable.
Very good discussion.
Personally, I like the 1.5 and talk to the county.
Okay.
I mean, when you started talking about per capita with Commerce versus Greenville, I mean, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
They shouldn't even put up an argument. So, that's my opinion.
What else?
The next two categories are park improvements and then the downtown. And so if there's any lack of clarity for me, it's these two areas. I think our parks and recreation system desperately needs some investment because we've got entire parks that are full of very old hand-me-down parks equipment that frankly isn't safe. And so we had talked about, for example, Ivory Moore, if we did playground and some site improvements there, $250,000 to $300,000 is probably going to be a major shot in the arm for that park, but it doesn't touch the baseball field. We had talked about at City Park, there's decent playground equipment there, but honestly, for the volume of traffic that park gets, the playground is undersized. And so if we were going to put a playground there, I would recommend what's called an inclusive playground, so that the playground itself has access for ADA kids, children, and families. And so probably $150,000 of investment is going to give you a really nice, adequately sized, accessible playground in City Park. We had talked about the fact that there is no water recreation in our community, hasn't been for a number of years. Across my career, I've built 5 different splash pads. I maintain splash pads are a very economical way to provide water recreation to a large segment of your community. Based on stuff that I've done in the past, I would say a $750,000 splash pad is probably the right size for our community, but you need design costs on top of that. So I said $1 million budget, located at City Park because it's centrally located. Families don't have to cross a state highway, and I already know I've got water and sewer infrastructure to support it. So we talked about $1 million for some kind of splash pad improvements at City Park. We talked about Centennial Park and Eddie Moore, where the baseball complex is. There are a number of things we could do to that baseball complex to improve its usability, especially in inclement weather. But we also know that the school system is fixing to propose to do a major investment in their baseball complex. And so do we need to duplicate that expenditure? Do we need the school to do a major investment in their ball complex and us do a major investment in a baseball complex? It needs some investment. How much of investment, I think, probably remains to be seen based on what the school does. But all in all, we were talking about $1.5 million for park improvements. I've had some feedback from council and even some in the community that question whether now is the time to do a splash pad. And I think that's a conversation that is valid and that we need to have. It's just, what is the value we're providing to this community for the money the community is giving to us? And I feel there's a very large segment of our community that could be served by some kind of water recreation features. Whether we do it now or in the future, it's needed. Whether now is the right time to pull the trigger is for y'all to decide and me to execute. But that's been the conversation we've had about parks. Looking at the downtown area, Teddy, you had asked, is there a place that we can invest some money that's going to give us a return on that investment? I would agree and argue that downtown is one of those areas that we could invest some of this capital project dollars into, that could spur more development, which is more property improvements. At a minimum, I think we need to look at sidewalk improvements into our downtown area. Alan with Friesen Nichols has pointed out there's state dollars potentially that we could get. We have to wait till 2023 to find out if it's on the table. So do we want to wait that year and a half to find out? If we can get 80% paid by the state, I think it's going to take a year and a half to make any plans. But there are other improvements that can be made downtown. I think we desperately need some investment in the farmers market area to make that more functional, more usable for more than just farmers market. I think there's some improvements we can make downtown to increase the number of events that can happen. If we can have events downtown, it brings people into our downtown area, which brings business to these businesses, which is going to spur more development. So yes, I think a wise investment would be to spend some money downtown. The question is just how much. And so we don't have a full plan yet, but we'd been talking about $1 million to $1.5 million. You can put a really big dent in the functional use of our downtown spaces with that budget, which would primarily be sidewalk improvements. It would be some aesthetic improvements, some restrooms, improving parking, and improving the farmers market. All of that I think would be incredible benefit. Parking alone is an issue. We've got Omegas that's investing downtown. We've got others that are investing downtown. So we're going to put more pressure on the parking that's available. That area by the farmers market could use a new parking surface. All of that can be accomplished. We just need to kind of start narrowing in. If y'all tell me $1 million is the number, then I can bring you back the best use of that funds in our downtown area. If you think it's $1.5 million, we'll come back and tell you what we think is the best use of those funds. We just need to know a number that y'all are comfortable investing there. But all of that depends on what you want to see done. And that's the purpose of tonight's conversation. So there's a lot we could do in parks. There's a lot we could do downtown. If we spend 1.25 on streets, we spend 800 on the library, and if we spend 1.5, then you've basically got $2 million to $2.5 million to split between parks and downtown at whatever funding ratio you are comfortable with. And we welcome your thoughts and your questions.
You'll always let me go first. Thank you so much.
Like-
All right. Well, I think Ivory Moore is a no-brainer. We have to do something down there. I wish we could do more with the parks, but I mean for the ballpark, but we can try to look at that for the next year. I think the inclusion downtown, at the city park, is another one that I feel is something that's needed very much. The Eddie Moore, I hear you on that the school system is going to be putting money into that, but they're looking at it from a UIL point of view.
And tournaments.
And tournaments. All right. But we have invested with the Boys and Girls Club to get them to be bringing in events here.
Yes.
Will we have the access to those ballparks there?
Based
So-
on my conversations with Superintendent, yes, because the UIL seasons, when they're going to be doing tournaments, is not during our active youth baseball seasons. And when we're having our active baseball seasons for our youth recreations, they're not even in school. And so he's committed that they would make that available for us to use for tournaments during our youth baseball seasons. And we would have access to it.
Okay. All right. So, just whatever we were planning out there, I'm not for sure what it was that we were looking. I think downtown, again, I'm one of those that I think the splash pad is a wonderful idea. I think it's something that it's hard for me to back at this moment because of the streets.
Could, for the splash pad, could we do the engineering for it this year?
I don't know. I mean, is that something we should even be,
You could, and in any of these projects,
well, and we could.
in, in, in terms of construction schedules, at best, it's gonna take 6 months to design something. Typically, it's 9 months to design something. So if you told me start today, it's 9 months before I'm breaking ground and starting construction. So the construction's not gonna happen until probably next calendar or next fiscal year. But the issue is, we could start design now, and then figure out what construction we wanna do next year. But we've got some funding capacity that we know in
We
this
can do
year's
now.
rate, and next year's rate, we have a conservative projection of what we think's gonna happen, but we don't really know. But we could definitely start design.
The
And then-
design would better define the outcome cost.
Well, and I hear that. There's two, I guess, there's two sides of me. There's one of the accountant point of view is to spend our money where we can get a little bit more return. And not to say that the kids playing at the park is not a good return, but I'm looking at it from an accounting point of view. If we were to spend that money this year or that into the development of downtown and what we could do here so that we can bring events in that could then help the community by having more sales tax, then we're helping then the people that could use a splash pad, and we could actually afford it. I mean, right now it's just the accountant in me is just saying I'm having a hard time spending 1.5 or just a million on a splash pad. I think it's a great idea, and I would hope to be here when we get to do that in the next year or two. But I just have to see it in a couple of years. But I would rather spend that money and try to generate something so that we can help to, quote, subsidize what our citizens are having to pay for. And if we can, I mean, we've been doing pretty well downtown, but at the same time, traffic is starting to slow down here, and we've got to get this generating and get it moving again. I think if we're able to get events back down here, I think we have to have something that we can do to bring in events.
Agreed.
And closing down the streets has been a problem from the point of that, whenever you want to go to get to one of these restaurants or whatever, when we're having an event, if we had parking over where we could still have the streets open, I think that also helps the community or the community of businesses as well. So, just my thought. Thank you, gentlemen, for letting me go first.
I think I like the splash pad, personally. I think it's something we need to strongly look at, and consider. Growing up here, it's, water recreation is missed. Since we closed the pool, it's missed. And Teddy grew up here as well. Wow.
All right, season passes to the pool.
Any other comments? I too am a fan of the splash pad idea. I have reservations about expense downtown without a plan for 10 years. We have an example of a city, Sulphur Springs, got a plan, asked other taxing entities to help them pay for the infrastructure improvements. They didn't just ask the taxpayers of the city to do it. I don't know why we haven't already established a geographic area for inviting the other entities to participate. That doesn't seem to thrill many of you. I don't know why, but we could have done it 3 years ago and had some dollars to spend today, but we didn't do it. But you know, you have to come up with a plan of what you want to do with the money. And then designate the geography, and we don't lose a dime of current taxation. None of the taxing entities lose a dime. It's just the increment of increase. As people invest downtown, that money comes to the city of Commerce from more than one taxing entity. It just makes sense. That's how that happened in Sulphur Springs. So I hate to spend $1.5 million downtown without a plan. And without assistance from other taxing entities who will participate.
Well, the one in Sulphur Springs didn't start paying off until probably 10 years. I mean, it
Well-
took 10 years. Now, we could start doing it now to get our
If
money.
you don't start,
Right,
you
I
never
agree with
have
you.
any money.
I agree with you. We need to start the TERS. We need to start that, but I don't think that's something that we're gonna get immediate return on right now. It's gonna be a while before we get that money.
They also had a grant for
Yeah.
facades.
Yeah.
So, which I think if that grant's still available or something like that to help
Well,
pay for the facade improvements.
and just like applying for federal infrastructure money that might filter down to the state, if we have a plan, we're liable to get it funded. But we don't have that.
So are we talking about that we maybe for downtown, if we were to to develop our plan and then have it where we could then determine what we're gonna do with it?
Well, he said that, you know, 80% of the improvement might come from outside sources.
Well, that's just those are sidewalks.
Sidewalks.
That's
I'm
just
talking
sidewalks.
downtown sidewalk.
Right, I understand
All
that.
right, if we had our TERS, we could match the 20 without a budget strain,
Okay.
but we don't have that.
Okay, I understand that, so I agree with you that we need to get started on doing the TERS. But understanding that it's gonna be 3 years from now before we get any money, or if we got the grant. We don't even know if we'll get the grant. I feel like that we can do a lot of investment in this open space that the city owns. The city owns the whole thing over there, that is
Farmers Market.
Farmers Market and that park area. We could, and then we have another green area that we could buy, and we could make a plan, which is already a part of what we spent money in the tool group, design. There is a plan there. It needs to be, you know, tightened up and
Well-
figured out what we wanna do, but we have something there that we could move with.
Another issue with downtown that's expensive is drainage. And sidewalks are part of, and curbing are part of the drainage. And therefore, we gotta have a plan.
Well, which chicken?
And we gotta have engineering, so that we gotta have money.
Well-
And there are more than one way of getting the money, but one of them is the TERS. And we've just sidestepped that and not done it for 3 years.
Well, I think the chicken and the egg need to come at the same time. And the TERS needs to be happening right now. But we
still-
also have a plan that we've already spent our money on for downtown that needs to be relooked at, and for us to say, this is what we want to do, and say that we're going to kind of put that much money into downtown to get it moving.
But there's things we could do and need to do right now.
Right now,
I-
right.
I agree, and it, you know, it's not impossible with our current situation. But the whole point is, we gotta agree on a plan before we spend the first dollar. Or it could be wasted.
I think all we have to do is pull out the tool group plan that we had, look at it, and then look at the money that we're looking at right now, we could finalize that plan.
I would be very much in favor of that.
So do we still want to do 1.5?
Well, if you've got, I'll say if you've got 2.5 million to play with,
Uh-huh.
how much do you want to put into parks and how much do you want to put into downtown? And then based on that, we can start having, because the ultimate decision has to happen in 2 weeks on the 21st.
Well, the
This
park, the
year's
discussion of what we
decision,
had the
not
parks.
ultimate decision.
Yeah.
Well, this year's decision has to happen
Yeah.
in 2 weeks.
But I
agree.
think we,
Ultimate decision.
Let's say 1.5 to the parks,
Yeah.
1 million to downtown.
right.
Well, we will have some clarity and some options on those 2 items on the 21st for our final discussion on this, and then we can move from there.
Okay.
Very good.
And so that's the presentation. You don't have to open a public hearing. We felt it would be prudent to do so, and then we can move on from there.
You know how I love to open public hearings. At 7:55, we open a public hearing. Is there anyone who would wish to speak to any item we have discussed? Here we have a speaker. Please come up, give your name and address.
Hi, my name is Andrew Baker, and I'm the president of the Commerce Public Library Board. And I just wanted to first thank you for the investment in the facility and the services we offer. And we are excited to have a space that is more functional, accessible, usable. As the stats Howdy was giving you on the percentage of senior citizens we have, the accessibility issues have been a major issue we've faced. So thank you for that. As in regards to the public bathroom, one of the concerns we would have there would be with monitoring, cleaning those facilities. And so in the past, we've discussed that as a possible option, but we would, I guess at this point, not be super excited about having the downtown's bathrooms. But having bathrooms for those who are using the facilities, absolutely, we are very in support of. So if there's any questions, particularly for us, I can answer those, but for this point, I just wanted to say thank you. Okay.
We thank you for your comments. What do we need to do now? Anything else on 7?
At some point, close the public hearing.
Close it now. Your public
You
hearing.
know, that's a good idea. Why don't we do that at 7:56? We'll close this public hearing, and we will, is there any other information you need from 7?
No.
You're okay.
And 8 was only there if y'all needed to take a vote on giving us direction on what to do with the CIP, but I don't believe that's necessary at this point. And so
Okay,
We promise you we'll get a vote here.
eventually.
Well, we will by next meeting, for sure.
Okay, item 9, first reading, discussion and possible action on an ordinance amending ordinances 2021-08 to reflect modified City of Commerce water and wastewater rates.
As part of the proposed budget, we looked at the Public Utility Fund, and it's not a secret, but it may be a surprise to many that the Public Utility Fund in Commerce has been losing money every year for a significant stretch of years. And so they've been pulling from fund balance and reserves, both to maintain operations but also to prop up and support the general fund. And so over the past 8 years, there has been no conversation about adjusting the water rates. Last year, there was a small adjustment that was given to the base charge as part of the water and sewer rates, but the consumption charge, the volume charges have not been touched in 8 years. And so with that fund losing money and looking at the condition of our infrastructure, I can't in good conscience continue to present a budget that loses money like that. And so when you have a budget that's losing money, you can either cut expenses, raise revenues, or do some combination of the two. Considering how desperately behind we are on maintenance for our utility, and frankly how understaffed we are in our utility, I really can't say cutting that budget is the answer. So we've got to look at our resources. And so that will include a look at our utility rates. And so we went through a very long discussion about this during our workshop. I don't want to repeat that but there may be people that are here or that are watching online that haven't had that conversation and want to know how it impacts them. And so if you'll belabor me at least a little bit more time, the first point of conversation there in your utility is understanding that it is an enterprise fund, and by design it's supposed to operate like a business. We have not been. And so the difference between the general fund and an enterprise fund is in the general fund you have taxes as a source of revenue, and so not all of the services are 100% paid for by the people that use those services. And so we'll use fire department as an example. You don't pay the fire department when they make a call and they put a fire out at your house, but you need them to be available in case your house catches on fire. And so the funding model for a fire department is different than a funding model for a utility service. In a utility service, the people that use the service should pay for the service, and you should work to minimize subsidies. And so understanding your customer classes, predominantly you have residential class customers, commercial class customers, and then industry or institutional class customers. And you want to evaluate whether one group is subsidizing the other groups. And looking at how our rates have been structured for a number of years, the residential class customers in Commerce have been subsidizing the commercial and the industrial customers. That's not unusual. It happens in other communities. I would submit those other communities don't have half of their population living at or below the poverty line. And so again, I come back to that important demographic at looking at the residential class customers that we have, asking them to subsidize the university, asking them to subsidize the county, and now asking them to subsidize commercial and industrial customers. I don't think that's reasonable or sustainable. And so we looked at, and we've made major changes to the structure of our utility rates with that in mind. And so the first point of discussion on water rates is the creation of what's called a lifeline rate. I think I could argue that water is as important as air. If you don't have air, you don't survive for very long. If you don't have water, you don't survive for very long. And so there is a fundamental domestic health and safety need for water that residential customers and homes have that needs to be protected. And so we have designed a rate structure for the first tier of consumption. That's the first 4,000 gallons of water used is what we're classifying as the lifeline rate, and we're actually dropping that charge. The cost per 1,000 gallons of water for that first tier of consumption for residential class customers, we're dropping that from $372 down to $350. Wow, not a big drop, but the point there is that we've now identified the first 4,000 gallons of consumption as your basic domestic health and safety water, and moving forward we will protect that tier of consumption. It's important to note that of our residential class customers, 50% of our homes never use more than 4,000 gallons of water. I think it's interesting that 50% of our homes are at the poverty line. They are not our major water customers. They're not our major water consumers. So the bulk of our infrastructure, the bulk of the capacity within our pumps is not being used by this residential class of customers. They should not be subsidizing those that are using that capacity. And so that first tier for residential customers is set at $3.50 per thousand. The next 5,000 to 15,000 gallons is still generally domestic use within a home. And so that's set at $5 per thousand. Anything above 15,000 gallons typically becomes discretionary use of water. And if you're conscious of water conservation, the single most powerful thing a city can do to influence water usage is send strong pricing signals. And so From 16 to 50,000 gallons of water, we're saying it's $6 per thousand. And then anything over 50,000 gallons is $7 per thousand. And those pricing signals are intended to communicate to residential customers. If you want to use more than 50,000 gallons a month, go for it. But you got to pay for it because you are using higher volumes of water. Within our profile for residential customers, 5% of our residential class customers get over 50,000 gallons, and they only do it a couple of times a year. So this is not a major user class, but the pricing signal is there. Apartment complexes, multifamily, it's a residential use, but you have multiple housing units that are combined in one or a couple of meters. We do not have that lifeline rate for these residential customers because there's no way to bill per living unit. So their first tier is $5, 16 to 50 is $6, and over 50,000 is $7 per thousand. That is the same structure for commercial, industrial, and institutional. So 0 to 15, 16 to 50, and greater than 50 under that $5, $6, and $7 pricing structure. Your commercial industrial customers, there is a small minority of customers that live at that very high tier of consumption, and they should be paying for that capacity that they use. But you also have a significant number of commercial establishments that are what I call, they're not convenience stores, but think of that model. It's an office building and all they have is a restroom. They don't use a whole lot of water, and they'll never get out of that first tier. They pay the lower price because they're not major water customers. Where this is significantly going to impact is in two places. Industrial customers, we have a small number of industrial customers that are major water users, and they have been subsidized for years by the residential class. And so, yes, I'm proposing that their prices go up. Yes, they are going to not like it. And I will publicly say I have no sympathy for them because they didn't complain for all the years they were being subsidized. We're going to stop the subsidy, and their costs will go up, but they're a for-profit business, and they can roll it into their business model, and they can move on. The last piece is our wholesale water contracts. We have retail customers that are within the city limits that are tapped into our system, and then we have wholesale customers that we sell them the water, and they mark it up and turn and sell it to their customers. We have 4 wholesale customers. Each one of them have a contract, and those contracts control how their rates are set. So we can't just arbitrarily adjust their rates. It's set by contract. However, the city has not been looking at those contracts and adjusting their rates over the years. And so the wholesale customers that live outside of town have significantly been subsidized by the retail customers within town for a significant period of time. And so we used their contract, and we used the method that is within the contract, and their rates are going from $3.72 to $5.29 per thousand. That's a major jump in cost for them, and they've already been notified of that. But they can't argue with it because we're using the contract that they signed to calculate those rates. There is still some small subsidy that our retail customers are providing to those wholesale customers because of how the contracts are written. But I've already talked to the largest wholesale customer, and they're willing to renegotiate the contract. And so we're starting that conversation as well. But our goal is to have a utility that's not losing money and is minimizing subsidies between customer classes. And that's what this rate design accomplishes as it's been put together. The last piece of this is the sewer charges. We're not touching trash. Solid waste is not moving. But there will be a small increase on the sewer charges. We have major issues with our wastewater collection system because of deferred maintenance, and we have to be able to fund repairs to that. However, one of the adjustments that we're making is, again, for the residential class customer, again, I don't want to belabor it, but fundamentally, I have a meter that measures every gallon of water that goes into a home. There is no meter that measures every gallon of sewer that leaves a home, and there's no reliable way to do that. So no matter what you do, you have to make some assumptions. There is a paradigm that on one end of the swing of the pendulum, they just charge you a flat fee for sewer and don't pay attention to anything about volume. That's a valid assumption. It penalizes your low fixed income, low volume users. It penalizes them and it rewards your high volume users. Swing the pendulum all the way to the other side. The whole charge is based on the volume, and it protects your low volume users and it penalizes your high volume users. But for the residential class customer, if Joe Bob is using 20,000 gallons at his home, there's a very strong possibility that we don't have 20,000 gallons of water coming down the sewer line. And I have no way of knowing how much went down the sewer line. And so you meet in the middle with an assumption that looking at the consumption patterns of our customers, half of our customers never get over 4,000 gallons. 90% of our customers never get over 10,000 gallons. Well, I think it's a fair assumption to say that 10,000 gallons and less is probably used indoors, and anything over 10,000 gallons is probably outdoors and never touching our sewer system. And so these rates propose a cap for residential class customers at 10,000 gallons. And so you will have a base fee that hasn't been changed. You'll have a volume charge based on how much water you use up to 10,000 gallons. So if you use 4,000 gallons, you have a lower sewer charge, but it's capped at 10,000 gallons, and a residential customer will never pay a charge higher than that 10,000 gallon consumption. So we're, in theory, giving up the revenue for everything over 10,000 gallons, but only 10% of our customers ever get there. And so we're not giving up much revenue, and I think we have a more equitable calculation for sewer charges. Commercial, industrial customers, every gallon of water they use, they pay a sewer charge for. Again, I don't know how much is coming back down the sewer line. I have no reliable way of knowing how much that is. But if they're a for-profit business and water is part of their livelihood, they can figure that out. And so the intent of this water rate design is to stop losing money, minimize subsidies, and allow us to maintain the system more actively than it's been maintained in years. It is a rate adjustment. It is going to increase bills more for commercial and industrial customers than it does for residential customers. But we have to stop the bleeding, and we can't let February 2021 happen again. And so this is an ordinance. It requires 2 readings. And so we presented this to you in the budget workshop. This is the first reading of that ordinance. If y'all approve the first reading, we will then start pushing this out to the community so that the final adoption happens on the 21st, and rates would be effective in October. We'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Are there any questions? Is there a motion on first reading?
Make a motion that we pass on the first reading.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
That motion carries. Thank you. I know of no reason for an executive session. Is that correct?
It's not on the agenda, so yes, there is no. But before we adjourn, I just want to remind everyone on the 21st, that meeting's going to actually start at 5:30 rather than 6. We have 2 different public hearings that are going to happen on the 21st. As you may know, we have received a zoning application for what's called a planned development for a residential subdivision of 300 lots. We're taking that zoning application to the Planning and Zoning Commission on the 15th. We're going to ask the council to consider that zoning application on the 21st. It requires a public hearing. If it is approved, The developer, which happens to be one of the top 5 home builders in the DFW Metroplex, is going to close and buy approximately 70 to 75 acres, and they have a 300 lot subdivision that they have proposed inside of our city limits, which we're incredibly excited about and hope we can land that fish. That public hearing will be at 5:30, and then depending on how long that public hearing lasts, we'll probably then adjourn into an executive session to talk about that development deal. And then we'll come out of executive session to start our regular meeting at 6, which is where we talk about budgets and tax rates and have those hearings. So we do start at 5:30 instead of 6 so that we can discuss that zoning application. And that's different than what you normally have to be here for. And I just want to remind you, 5:30 instead of 6 in 2 weeks.
Very good. Council, is there any reason we should have another meeting prior to the 21st to discuss these priorities so we don't spend all night on the 21st? Or do you just want to hammer it out there?
I mean, I'm willing to do it if we're, to narrow down the,
We've asked for some more information.
Information.
I'd love to have it before that
I do
meeting that
too.
becomes.
And then, and we can just say, it's done.
Would that work for you, Mr. City Manager?
So Tuesday, a week from now,
I think that would be ideal.
we can make
What
that
do you
happen.
all think? I think it would take a lot of fret out of the decision meeting, because we maybe we can have another voice here and get some other perspective and come up with something that we can all support. I think that would be ideal.
So that'd be
Quick.
14th?
14th.
Yeah.
6 p.m.
Quick, 6 p.m. Quick update on Tractor Supply.
Their general contractor has registered, and so we expect to see construction start on a new Tractor Supply within the next 30 to 60 days.
30 to 60 days. Okay. I'll quit driving by every day. What about Ace Hardware?
They've pulled all the permits that are necessary from us. Everything they're doing is inside the building, not a whole lot to see. But
Are they
that-
actually working inside the building?
I'd have to talk to
I
my
have
folks.
observed that daily and don't see anything different. Oh,
It is now.
Bonnie, have you any report on our new industry?
They have started renovations on the inside of the building. They have started the demo of the inside.
They have identified the general contractor. They're remodeling the Covidian building. They still maintain that they'll be open for business with 200 new jobs by the middle of next year. That's aggressive,
exciting.
but I'm optimistic.
That's exciting.
Start with 300 homes.
Yeah. We need homes for those 200 jobs.
Yeah.
Say again? Yeah. Yeah. Anything else? At 8:18, I declare this meeting adjourned.